I'd like to welcome everyone to the 15th Annual Women in Science Alumni Career Panel event. This event is co-sponsored by WIS and the AU Career Center. My name is Teresa Larkin, and I'm Associate Professor of Physics Education and Director of the Dual Degree Combined Plan in Engineering Program option that AU has in affiliation with Columbia University. I also have the great pleasure of serving as the advisor to the Women in Science Student Organization. WIS has had a banner year this year, in large part due to its outstanding leadership. I am really super proud of this group of student leaders. It's an honor for me to serve as their advisor and to serve as one of the moderators for this important annual event. And you know what I forgot to do? Is share my screen. So there we go. So I want to remind you that this session is being recorded and will be made available to those who are not able to attend today's event on the Career Center's YouTube channel. You can also submit your questions via the Q&A feature on Zoom. If you're attending the watch party, Miley Dowsett and Ellie Clark, our co-vice presidents, will handle securing your questions and posing them to the panelists. We've assembled an outstanding panel of alums who have all earned a STEM or related degree at AU. We've invited them to this platform tonight to provide helpful suggestions and offer advice to you, our current students in the sciences at AU. We hope that the dialogue we begin today will serve to provide you with some advice and useful information as you go forward on your own career paths. The alumni that have taken time out of their own busy schedules to join us today include Madeleine B., Becca Gustine, Cathy Furlong, and Lindsay Milliken. After my brief opening remarks, I will turn things over to our WIS leadership, who will start us off by asking each of our alumni panelists to introduce themselves. I'd like to first start with a few thank yous. I'd like to thank everyone at the Career Center and especially Emily Lalande for her help with this event. We certainly couldn't have pulled it off without you, Emily. We also want to thank all of the awesome folks at the Career Center for your continued and tireless efforts to assist our students, including our undergrad and grad students, as well as recent graduates as they navigate from the academic world to the next phase of their professional journeys. One goal of this panel event is to learn about the experiences of our alums as they traverse both their academic as well as their professional STEM careers. And it's our hope that these shared experiences will provide encouragement to our current undergrad and graduate students in STEM. An additional goal of tonight's event is about making important connections. One thing that I've learned, having spent nearly 30 years of my career at AU, is that our alumni understand the importance of making and keeping those professional connections. They stay in touch with faculty members and are always willing to give of their time to help out current students. Making these kinds of connections is perhaps more important in 2025 than it's ever been before. I want to share with you briefly the message that I continue to reiterate to my own students. I think it's simple, yet very powerful, and that is simply we're stronger together. It is through events such as this one that I am reminded of the true sense of community that forms the backbone of everything we do to embrace one another and live the message of equity and inclusion as members of the AU community. Before we begin, I want to outline the format for this event. Following these welcome remarks, I will turn things over to Leah Starr, our WIS president, who will ask the alumni to speak for approximately 2 to 3 minutes to introduce themselves. Following the introductions, Abrina Liu and Saisha Bhatt, our WIS co-recruitment chairs, will ask the panelists questions from a list that the alumni were sent from the Career Center, and then the list was prepared by the Career Center. We'll set aside probably 30 minutes, maybe a little longer, depending on how long the intros take for these questions. We'll then move on to questions from the audience. At this point, Miley Dowsett and Ellie Clark, our co-vice presidents, will serve to ask the questions received from the audience. And again, you may also type your questions into the Q&A area, and we'll do our best to address as many of them as we can in the time that remains. And Leah will come back for some closing quick remarks. Lastly, I simply want to say thank you again to all of our outstanding panelists and to everyone in attendance tonight for helping to make tonight's event a success. I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say. And at this point, Leah, take it away.
Thank you so much for starting us off, Dr. Larkin. I'm now gonna ask our alumni to please introduce yourself, sharing some stuff about your background and also your current involvements in STEM. Would anybody like to start?
I can start. Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Madeleine. I graduated from AU in 2015 studying chemistry. So I took quite a few classes in the physics department. And I also did a minor in math. So covered a few different areas in STEM while I was there. Straight out of undergrad, I went to grad school. My plan was to be a government scientist, and I knew I needed a PhD to do that. So I went to Cornell studying food science. I concentrated in viticulture and enology. I was really interested in wine and grape flavor chemistry for my PhD, and I developed a new sampling method to assist wine growers during the harvest season make decisions about the quality of their grapes based on the aroma, which was very, very cool. I got to work in California for a harvest season, helped out just a little bit harvesting the grapes. They really wanted me in lab the whole time, so I spent most of the time inside. But it was still a very cool experience. And as wonderful as that was, I knew I wanted to be back in the DC area, and I really loved being in lab. I became an analytical chemist despite studying food. It just kind of happened to be the matrix that I was working with, but I really loved the analytical chemistry and the research and the lab work. So I came back to DC, sort of thinking about food policy a little bit. Of course, like my roots coming from American, I was interested in that, but also wanting to do lab work. So I interviewed for a lot of different kinds of jobs, and I actually ended up in industry initially at an analytical chemistry manufacturing company called Shimadzu Scientific Instruments. They make pretty much all the lab equipment you've probably used. I know AU has a lot of stuff, everything from scales to a lot of the atomic absorption, mass spectrometers, things that you find in the advanced chemistry labs. That's them. So I worked there for about a year and a half before moving into consulting. So now I'm at Exponent, where I'm a managing scientist. I've been here for about 4 years now. And even though it's consulting, it's a little bit different than what your business school friends are doing. We are all scientists and engineers. So we do everything from regulatory support. We serve as expert witnesses in litigation that are around technical topics. And we also help clients with formulation development, prototypes. We say we support the full product life cycle of consumer products. So I'm involved in a lot of regulatory compliance, specifically with the EPA, so environmental samples. I also supported drinking water analysis as an analytical chemist looking at the data. I've gotten to continue to work in flavor and fragrance on occasion, and all sorts of other things. So looking forward to talking with you all tonight. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Would anybody like to go next?
Hi, I'm Cathy. I have a combination of liberal arts and math and statistics background. I started off teaching and realized I didn't like it, but I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. And I'm one of these people that I cannot jump out of the frying pan into the fire. I have to have an idea of what I want to do before I do it. So I went back to school, did a master's in liberal studies. That was women's history, psychology, philosophy, religion, etc. Loved it, had a great time, and then ended up at American University doing a master's in statistics. By that time, I think I was getting ready to leave teaching, and I became a statistician for a while. I worked as someone who did survey analysis in finding Medicare, Medicaid fraud investigations. And I enjoyed that, but I do have to say that of all the things I've done, it's been more in my volunteer work. My jobs have been more for the financial security. My volunteer work has been really where my passion is and where I really find joy. So a lot of the time I have spent volunteering through the American Statistical Association and also the American Association for the Advancement of Science. At the American Statistical Association, I have done a lot of volunteer work in Statistics Without Borders, which is an outreach committee that provides pro bono services for non-governmental organizations that cannot afford a statistician. I am also on the executive committee of Scientific Freedom and Human Rights, which works with reinforcing and giving help to statisticians who are having difficulties with the governments that they work in. Being a scientist, being someone who does statistics, you know, all governments require statistics, but not all governments enjoy what a statistician finds out. And so the committee that I volunteer on is there to support these types of people. I also mentor through the Washington Statistical Society, and for the American Association for the Advancement of Science, I have been a volunteer through On-Call Scientists. So I'm just letting you know that careers paths aren't necessarily straight. There are a lot of zigs and zags, and that is just fine. We are all trying to figure out what makes us happy. I look forward to talking to people.
Thank you so much. Rebecca, Lindsay, one of you want to go next?
I'm happy to go next. I am Lindsay Milliken. I am currently an immigration policy fellow at the Institute for Progress, which is a really new think tank based in DC. And we pride ourselves on being much different than a normal think tank, where we actually are hands-on involved in the policymaking process and also in the policy entrepreneurship that's so important, especially as we tackle, you know, the changing landscape in technology and science issues. But where I originally started is, so I graduated from American University with a bachelor's in political science and a minor in applied physics in 2017. And I didn't really know what to do with that at the beginning, but I started out actually at a government relations firm that represented universities and scientific societies pretty much exclusively in science policy. So working to increase the federal funding that is available for scientific research, especially at universities. I spent about 2.5 years there, moved on to the think tank world, where I was at the Federation of American Scientists working on 2 different projects. How to change our immigration system to make it better for talented people to come here and to stay here, and also to encourage more international students to come study in the US. And the other part of my job was helping scientists communicate better with members of Congress and their staff, because they do use very different ways of communicating with each other that don't often mesh very well. So being able to provide some guidance in providing resources to hearings and to congressional offices for legislative purposes was a big part of my job. Then I took a little bit of a detour and I worked at the European Union's delegation here in DC. So I was basically supporting the diplomat, was in charge of the scientific relationship between the EU and the US. And I didn't at the time know anything about European politics, but he was like, no, that's okay. You were actually one of the only people who was not an expert in EU politics. And he's like, I'm Belgium. I'm Belgium. I don't need anybody to tell me about how the EU works. Like, I already know how that works. I need to know how the American government works. So that was a big part of my job, is helping him advise him on offices to talk to help basically strengthen the relationship between the EU and the US. And then now I'm at IFP, where I'm focused exclusively again on high-skilled immigration policy issues. And all my work is focused on basically how to change policy to make it easier for scientists to come here.
Thank you so much. Rebecca, would you like to finish us off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I'm Becca. I am technically a water resources engineer, but I am an academic. I'm currently doing a postdoctoral fellowship at Columbia at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, where I'm focused on problems related to food and water security in the changing cryosphere, so ice and snow, and how that will impact livelihoods, food security, and subsequently migration from these high mountain environments. A lot of people are talking about how people are being redistributed because of the environment, and I wanted to explore that. Way back though, I started my undergrad at AU in public health. I had a very scattered list of interests, and ultimately I found my way to the dual degree program that Dr. Larkin is the head of at AU, but I discovered it probably a little too late in my program. So after undergrad, I decided I was going to do the Peace Corps, but I don't know, maybe serendipitously it got canceled just because there was a civil skirmish in the country I was going to go to. So I decided to go to grad school. And all I knew is that I probably wanted to do something with engineering and something with water. And I wanted to be on the West Coast. I had never been west in the Mississippi. And that was my only stipulation. I just wanted to go west. So I found myself at Washington State University. I was very interested in more of these applied sciences questions. So I wanted to go to more of a land was really focused on climate change, wildfires, and municipal watersheds. So how do we manage watersheds for the increasing risk of fire in areas that haven't historically really had wildfire? But because of probably my roots in Washington, D.C., I've always felt this tension between humanitarian work and science. So I always wanted to find ways to combine those two, which you actually can pretty easily in science. So with my PhD, I focused a little bit more on snow, agriculture, food security, water security, which was then my jumping off point to my postdoc. But through my PhD and my master's, I worked at NASA JPL in the Applied Sciences program and did a year-round internship that somehow just kept going and going and going, and worked on similar problems related to applied science and managing our natural resources to be more sustainable and adapted to climate change. So I now find myself at Columbia and wrapping up, actually just starting my postdoc and trying to figure out what's next. So I feel very similarly to probably you all who are trying to figure out what to do after undergrad. Looking forward to hearing all your thoughts and if you have any questions.
Thank you all so much for sharing. We're now going to turn to our moderators for the next section, which will start off our Q&A. So Abrina and Saisha, you guys can start.
Hi. I just want to say thank you, Leah, and thank you to all our panelists for such great introductions. Obviously, we're very thankful this year to have such diverse panelists with such unique backgrounds and qualifications. And it leads me to my first question. Why did you, oh my God. Oh, okay. Well, my first question of why did you choose these really unique combinations in your careers, and how in any way did AU influence or support your decisions?
I think I could jump off on that, I guess. I would have to say that I didn't really intend to do any of these things. I didn't really know that science policy existed when I was in school. Now people do talk about it more, and I hear more students interested in going into this field, which is very exciting. But when I was in school, nobody talked about it. I realized probably about halfway through my degree that I hated political science. I thought it was too theoretical. It was just a bunch of people writing papers that then got published into the void and no one ever read them. So I really was looking for something that was more concrete, and I took a gen ed physics class with Professor Larkin, and she was like, you know, if you take some more credits, you can get a minor. And I was like, okay, that sounds better than talking about why this Eastern European country is not a democracy, or when it will ever become a democracy. So I then jumped more into my physics minor. And it was actually one of my other physics professors, Dr. Greg Harry, who put in a good word for me actually at the government relations firm that I got my first job. So he worked on one of the projects that they had helped get federal funding for. And so he was familiar with the office. And that's really what kind of started me off on this path of working in science policy and also in international talent retainment.
I have to agree with Lindsay that I never chose my path. I started teaching, I didn't like it, I had no idea what to do. I just started taking courses that were interesting. However, liberal studies doesn't give you any job security. I ended up coming to American first to do a PhD in sociology, and I had to take a class in statistics. And that class was taught by Mary Gray, and anybody who's in the statistics department knows Mary Gray. She's amazing. And one time I walked into her office and she said, well, what do you feel about this sociology PhD? And I'm going, dang, I don't fit in. And she said, well, why don't you come over here and do a degree in statistics? And I'm going, wow, this is the first time someone actually thought I could accomplish anything. You have to understand, I'm significantly older, and I definitely was raised in a family that was conservative, and going off and doing a degree like this was not something that was reinforced. And so I actually started in statistics. And when I finished the degree, I had no idea what I was going to do with it. So Mary suggested I do some volunteer work. And I did. And it happened to be that I did volunteer work in the area of human rights. And it's like everything opened up for me. I'm going, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. I like this. So then I just started down that field. And as I started down that field, I ended up finding that I could volunteer my time, and I could volunteer my time and really feel as though I was actually doing something that made me feel good. My jobs, they paid the bills, but they weren't anything really interesting. So that's how I went. And that's why I really encourage people to volunteer for something, because it gives you the opportunity just to check out whether or not something interests you. And it's just a great way to check out what's available out there. So there is I had no path.
I'll jump in there because I think that would be one of my pieces of advice too, because some of my most fond memories at AU in extracurriculars was being involved with Alpha Phi Omega, the professional service fraternity, and the diversity of events that you can go volunteer at and do service and go explore the city. That I think that's one of the major takeaways from AU for me, and what helped me kind of figure out where I wanted to go is you can do a lot of things through service, and you can combine that with a career in a lot of different ways. And I think once I realized that you can have sort of more technical skills and then also provide that and use that to engage with people, it's a great way of, like Cathy said, refining what you find interesting while also giving back. But I think my whole background is a little chaotic. I went from public health, had an international business minor. Technically, I think could have qualified for a math minor, ended up being an engineer. So I think I had a very non-linear path to becoming a water resources engineer and getting a PhD. But I think what really helped me figure it out was that once you get beyond undergrad, at least for me, I enjoyed school so much more because you get to ask your own questions and have a lot of freedom. Whereas during undergrad, I feel like you have to take classes and you have to do it on somebody else's schedule. Whereas once you start in grad school, yes, that still exists, but being able to do research and have curiosity and combine disparate topics and have that freedom, I think, and actually be able to explore what I found interesting as opposed to fit into a class structure that I was required to take. I think that really is where I started to figure out how I could combine different topics and do what I really wanted to do.
Yeah, I think just like all the other panelists, like maybe my path makes sense looking backwards, but I think in the moment, I did not necessarily have a plan or a vision for where I ended up today. I didn't even know the job that I currently have existed. So I decided to study food science for grad school because I really liked food and I really liked chemistry. So I wondered if there was a way I could combine them. And when you Google food and chemistry, I was very surprised to find out that like you can get an actual degree in that. So something I did as an undergrad was a REU one summer, a research experience for undergrads. I actually did that at Cornell with the professor who became my PhD advisor. So that was like a sort of way to network, kind of understand what grad school was, what I hope to get out of it. There were lots of like networking, career, sort of like discussions and opportunities there. Because I really wasn't sure about grad school initially. It wasn't like my long-term plan. I never saw myself going into academia. But I was really interested in working like for the government, like FDA, EPA, something like that. And so that's where I got the advice that if I wanted to do that, I probably needed to go for a PhD. So I was like, well, okay. So applied around for that. I was super happy to get back into Cornell to do that and really fell in love with wine chemistry while I was there. But I kind of knew there's only a couple places in the world where you can do that, and they're all in the middle of nowhere. And I went to undergrad in Washington, D.C., and I really missed the city. So I knew I wanted to come back. So the last year of my PhD, I started getting really interested in science policy. And I applied for a lot of the fellowships, like you all probably know, the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. Some of the professional organizations kind of have their own sort of like inlet to that. There's also some smaller ones. But unfortunately, wine chemistry is like not super applicable to policy. So it's very hard to sell myself as someone who had some experience in something relevant like energy or, you know, agriculture. So unfortunately, those didn't work out, but I was pretty happy to go into industry, you know, and really hone my analytical chemistry skills. I got very lucky that my graduate advisor gave me a lot of freedom in the lab. So because we were kind of like the analytical lab in our department, we had all the instrumentation. And so I had my own gas chromatographer mass spectrometer to take care of. And I spent 4 years really learning the ins and outs. We did not have a service contract, so I had to do all the maintenance myself. I did all the cleaning and everything. And as a result, I befriended all the lab techs who came to visit. Because when I had questions, I really wanted somebody to ask. So the few times that we did have somebody come out, do service, or when something broke, I would sit with them the entire time they were there and just talk their ear off, ask them questions. So knowing that Shimadzu was in the DC area and I had already had a lot of experience talking to their lab techs, you know, I applied there and they recognized me. So I was very lucky that I kind of had a little bit of an in at that job and had kind of some of like the core knowledge for going into that. So that's how I got my first job. And then just being in the DC area, you know, I was like, well, maybe this is like how I can explore more kind of policy stuff. So, you know, maybe thinking about government jobs. I was applying around a lot and I actually made a lot of connections just applying for jobs, talking to people, interviewing. So I interviewed for a job at FDA in their like Office of Research and Policy and was talking to someone and she was like, oh, you should consider this regulatory scientist position. And I was like, I don't know what that is. Like, what does a regulatory scientist do? You know, and then she's like, they're the ones who are, you know, like making the methods for products that are out there that have to meet the regulations. You know, like when a product is tested, it has to meet the regulation. Like, who comes up with that method? It's government scientists. And I was like, oh, that sounds like a nice mix of like what I'm interested in, right? In terms of like regulation policy type stuff, combining with the analytical chemistry experience. So then I started seeking out regulatory scientist positions. And my team at Exponent is actually called Chemical Regulation and Food Safety. So we're on the client side, not the government side, but we're interfacing with the government on a lot of these regulatory issues. So we have science backgrounds because we kind of need to speak their language, but we also know the regulations very well. So very roundabout path, but in the end, it kind of all goes together.
Wait, thank you so much. Like, I feel like learning and hearing about all your experiences, like, I was like, wow, like, this is so cool. One thing that kind of struck out to me, I guess, is that many of you kind of were saying that your paths weren't really linear. And just out of curiosity, like, how did you kind of have that motivation or like that continued strength to, I guess, persist, even though, like, in the face of like uncertainty?
I think this is kind of a funny question, not because I think like I would have had no idea how to answer this when I was first starting out, but my answer is probably not the one that other people would give you, in that when I started at AU, I had like grand plans about what I was going to do after I graduated. I came into DC and I was like, I'm going to be Secretary of State and it's going to be fantastic and everything's going to be wonderful and I'm going to figure out how to do that. And then I realized that coming to AU, literally everybody wants to be something like that. And I was like, oh no, I have to figure out how to be different than all these other people. And then I decided I was going to be a foreign officer or something like that. And eventually I changed my goal many more times. By the time that I graduated, I was like, none of these goals have worked out in the way that I thought they were going to. I actually realized that I hated all these things that I thought that I would really like. So maybe I'm actually not good at judging what I think is going to be interesting. So maybe what I need to do is just have no goal. My goal would be just to learn things and to try to do a job that I found interesting. And if that was going to take me in some really weird directions, like that sounds like it'll be kind of interesting to see how that goes. And that's really kind of the way that I've navigated my career so far, is trying to always be on the lookout for things that I thought were interesting. And I have changed in the 8 years that I've been working. I have changed my job. This is my 4th job. And I really made the decision that I was going to always look out for new opportunities and new learning experiences, but then also remind myself that, like, if I'm not growing in my current position, then maybe it makes more sense for me to move on and find something else. And that's also something that I keep in mind a lot. So that's also explains why I've been to so many different types of jobs in science policy. Is really just look out for things that you find interesting, apply even if you think that you might not be a perfect fit for the job, because you never really know what's going to happen. And each time you get an interview, like, it's still a learning experience, and each new job is a learning experience. And that's sort of how I've come at it at a more open with a more open mind now than I did in the past. And also now there's less pressure. I don't have to feel like I have to be a Secretary of State anymore. It's more of like, well, if I'm gonna learn stuff in this job, that's pretty good. And that's a pretty low bar. So then that takes a lot of the pressure off.
As I have been listening to everybody has these major words of wisdom. And so once again, just like coming after Lindsay, I have to say that the comment of wanting a job because I want to learn, because I want to be challenged. And I have been told by many people, accept a job that you think you would be really interested in, but you go, oh my gosh, can I do this? And that's the job to take because it challenges you. We're all really, really bright, and we all get bored really easily. And for me, that's when I need to change. I need to do something that I find challenging, that I find interesting, that it's something I really look forward to. And okay, I have to say, when I looked at my jobs were there for financial security. That's why I did them. The volunteer work was there to accept the challenge that I wanted. And I personally found that I grew significantly more in my volunteer work because, one, I didn't have to worry about being fired. I was just giving my time. And I learned more leadership skills. I learned how to work with people. I learned how to work with a diverse group of people who had different skills and people who had skills so much better than me, but that I could work with them to create a goal. So the other thing that I've heard that I would like to reinforce is do interviews, either informational interviews or go out and interview for a job, because by talking to people, you learn what people are doing, why they are actually interested in their job, what they're getting from their job, how they got there. And so having a mentor or having someone at American who encourages you to just look into, just ask people. People love to talk about themselves. So just go and talk to them and get information and take that information in to help you make a decision of starting someplace. And if you go to a job and you find out you don't like it, well, you found out you didn't like it. And then you just move on.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm a bad combination of stubborn and competitive with myself. And so I sort of refuse to be stuck in a job that I didn't find satisfying. I grew up, nobody in my family went to college, and I grew up on a campground. So every day was kind of just like hauling dirt pretty much. And so I was like, I love being outside. Like, let me see if I can do something with that once I get to like an academic space. So I think I always refuse to like get bored and stuck in a job. And so during my grad studies, I was like, okay, I like being outside. What can I do with that? Let me see if there's an opportunity that I can indulge in that interest, in that enjoyment. And I did that. And I was like, okay, I really enjoy water stuff. Can I go do field work with water? And so I feel like with just by trying things, one thing leads to another, and you can slowly refine what you really find interesting. I think something that I really disliked going through school. I mean, I graduated from undergrad in 2016, so I don't know, feels like a long time ago at this point, but I feel like there's a lot of pressure on millennials and younger to pick what you want to do and figure it out and like be the most competitive at it with all of your peers. And that I sort of refused to get caught up in that. I just wanted to find something that I found interesting. So I think also ignoring outside pressure of like, you should do this or you should do that, or it has to be like the flashy job. I think also trying to push out those voices too can be a good way of just settling and figuring out what you find interesting. I think AU sometimes, in DC specifically, can be very competitive. You go do something and everybody says, hi, like, this is me. This is what I do for my job. So I think also trying to ignore some of those pressures too can be helpful. But yeah, just keep trying things. You might hate it or you might surprisingly love it.
Yeah, I just have to say also, my EU job, I wasn't even there for a whole year because I actually realized that I hated it a lot. But I had no idea. It was also, I learned two things from that. One of them was I found the job on, I think it was Indeed or something. I was like, this seems neat. I am probably never ever going to get a call back, but I'll just apply anyway and we'll just see what happens. And it turns out that out of like the 100 applications that people submitted, they chose me, which was a shock to myself. And then while I really value the experience, I realized about halfway through, like about 6 months in, I was like, I really don't like working in a government. This is something that the red tape is terrible. I have to get so many forms signed. And I realized I saw all my other policy friends who are like having fun in think tank world. And it was the period of time in my life where I was like, I actually made a wrong turn here in my career. Like, this is the wrong direction. And I need to go back to doing what I was before, because now I feel like I've learned that I actually do like what I was doing, and I realize I liked it more than I thought I did. And yeah, so wrong turns are okay. Sometimes you can definitely like market that into something that sounds super impressive. You just don't say the part where you actually hated being there. But yeah, wrong turns are fine. That's totally how this works. Every once in a while you just get one, you're like, yeah, that wasn't that great. That wasn't a good choice for me.
Yeah, just to echo what everyone else says, I think the motivation for me was looking for things that were really challenging, stimulating, interesting, where I could learn in a new environment. But also with like a job that works for my life, like I think coming out of grad school, I was really burned out on lab work from spending so much time in lab, but I was also like sort of realizing that I didn't have a work-life balance. Like I was very lucky to work with all of my friends, but that also meant that it was very easy to spend a lot of time at work. So I got into my first job and I liked it, but it had a long commute. And unfortunately, I started a month before the pandemic started. So the job itself changed a lot. It was supposed to be this pretty travel heavy, like going to conferences, meeting with customers, doing demos, giving talks. I was very excited to like be in a team and have more people to work with. And instead, as the pandemic progressed, I ended up just being in lab a lot again by myself, which is what I was trying to get away from in grad school. So I was like, okay, the goal is still to like be on a team to work with people, but I was also trying to improve my life. I realized I didn't want a long commute. I knew I wanted to like be in a city. And so like a lot of my job searching was looking on LinkedIn and like first going to the map and seeing where a company was located. Cause I was like, I think my life will be better if I can walk to work instead of driving for an hour. Like, I think my life will be better if I can spend more time at home where I live near like the fun stuff that I like to do. A job that like had the remote work option. Since I wasn't attached to a lab, I no longer had to go in, and that felt safer and easier during the pandemic. So I think like the work-life balance is also a motivator for me, at least. Like I now, like where I'm at in my career, like I wouldn't take a job that would require me to commute for an hour because I know it just doesn't work for my life. So that's also a big factor.
Thank you guys so much for your answers. I think it's really relieving to see that, you guys all are going through, like, you guys all experience some sort of doubt or change in your careers. It's kind of relieving as someone who constantly having doubts about their career and constantly is like, what am I going to do in my life? And it's like, it's good to hear that it's not an isolated situation. So, this was a good gateway into my next question about some advice. So, especially as STEM's like, careers, what are some networking like tips you guys have or opportunities that should be more, I don't know, essential to being a STEM career in a STEM career? I know it's really big part of business careers or political science, but what about for STEM? What are some network tips that, we should really hone in on?
I think as probably a lot of sciencey people, and very unlike a lot of policy people, I'm actually quite an introverted person. Really don't get a lot of energy gain from actually having to do any of this networking or anything. And I actually hated networking when I first started. I didn't want to talk to all these people. It was very overwhelming to be at happy hours or other types of events. So what I ended up doing is, after a bunch of very miserable events where I was like, nobody's going to want to talk to me, I'm really early in my career, I have nothing interesting to say. I said, well, I have to start somewhere. So I'm just going to go to this next event and talk to one person that I don't know and just have one conversation and like hopefully get their business card at the end. And then I set the bar for myself so low that it was very easy for me to get over it. And then I felt very like accomplished after that. And then the next event that I had, I was like, okay, I'm going to talk to 2 people I don't know. And then I just ratcheted that up slowly to the point that talking to strangers was not as big of a deal anymore, wasn't as scary as it used to be. So I think that that's probably like, other than being really open to new things that you are not sure if you would be good at, or even, but if they sound interesting, trying to apply for those, is try to set like small goals for talking to people. If you're not an introvert, if you're not an extroverted person, just start with like just talking to 1 person, and then 2 people, and then 3 people, and then suddenly you don't need goals anymore because you're talking to everybody and it's totally fine.
I personally think that most STEM people are introverts. I get most of my energy alone. But, okay, so I started teaching, and I think that part of what I didn't like about teaching is I had to interact with so many people. I was always exhausted. And when I left that, I have to admit that what happened is I started realizing that, one, a lot of people had so much more knowledge in particular areas than I did. And if I talked to them, understanding what they knew would help me on my jobs. So that's how I started learning how to talk to people. But then on top of it, okay, so I was working at the same time I was going to grad school. So I didn't have the opportunity that a lot of you had, in that you're full-time. Mary Gray was my advisor. And gradually I started talking to my professors. And what I found out, and as I continued with my career, I found out that these were people who were actually mentoring me. By mentoring, I mean suggesting opportunities or giving me information about what else would be going on. And because I saw how important that was for me, then I started being a mentor through the Washington Statistical Society. And I've been doing that for at least 7 years now. And for me, giving back and helping people who are at the start of their career is what I find it's very important. It's important to have people to talk to bounce ideas off of. In addition to that, the American Statistical Association, okay, so I've talked to people who know about associations. The Statistical Association is amazing. They do have a paid staff, but other than that, it's all volunteer. And there are hundreds of people who volunteer for this association to work. And because of it, and we're all volunteer, we do talk to each other. And we go to conferences and talk to each other. So I have found that networking, I'm not looking at networking as networking. I'm looking at as how can I talk to this person to get information that will be of benefit to me later on. But at the same token, giving that back to them, that I have something to give to them also.
For me, also an introvert, I like to try to find ways to network without really networking. So like I would submit my CV to, the way I ended up working at NASA for 4 years is because I uploaded my CV to one of their repositories, and I got an email one day. I figured would never hear back probably, like, but I'm going to shoot my shot, and it ended up working out. So I think too, as introverts and not wanting to talk to people always, there are ways that you can sort of do things behind the scenes as well. And just, even if it's a long shot, try it. And I found in grad school that if I just cold emailed people and I said, hi, I find your work really interesting. I read maybe a paper of yours, or I saw a project that you were leading, and just sent them an email and wanted to just ask them about it. And I always found one-on-one conversations in a little bit more contained of an environment a little bit easier. That also, like, just if you, people love to hear that you find their stuff interesting. So if you just want to reach out, I feel like a lot of people are willing to just have a quick coffee or have a quick conversation to tell you about something they're working on, at least in academic space. But yeah, just try.
I think for me also, a fellow introvert as a scientist, I tried to be brave enough to put myself in situations where people would come up and talk to me instead of me having to go up and talk to them. So if I could submit my poster for a conference, that's great because you just stand next to your poster and people come and talk to you. So it's a little bit like easy networking. It's still scary as an introvert to have to like stand there. But I like put my name in for talks, especially if it was a sort of like competition. A lot of the professional societies will do this at conferences where they'll have like an undergraduate research competition and they bring like 6 or 10 of you together. It's a nice way to network with your peers. Who are also presenting alongside you, hear about their research, what their career plans are, what their school is like, but then also the conference organizers who invited you, right? And they're in industry or they're professors or something like that. And they kind of give you extra connections. It like truly didn't matter who won, first place or second place in those competitions because you got a lot of exposure. And then afterwards, people come up and have questions. They want to talk more about your research or hear about your future plans. So even though like I had a lot of fear of public speaking, I also had a lot of fear of approaching people. So for me, that was a strategy of at least the people will come to me if I'm the one giving a talk or a poster.
Thank you. The last question that we're going to ask is, what do you guys think are the most important skills that are valued by your company, your industry, or what do you think are like the most marketable skills that you have found really valuable?
I'm going to start with the really simple soft skills because I think you all would be surprised how big of a difference it makes to show up on time, have a positive attitude, be able to communicate about your workload and life and projects and ask questions when you're confused. I have had to like get better at some of these things, like asking questions, but so many of those things go such a long way. A willingness to learn, even when you don't know, goes so, so far, especially if you're switching fields, right? Like I think a lot of the other panelists, we've jumped around or are interdisciplinary, have changed fields, changed jobs. Like nobody expects you to know everything on the first day. You are inherently going to have to learn. So how do you show up when you don't know? Like, do you get defensive or are you really curious and open? And those skills go a very long way.
I think I would totally agree as a person whose job is basically entirely soft skills. Those have probably been the absolutely most important ones, not just for like being good at my job, but then also being successful in networking, because that's also kind of the other thing is that if your coworkers really enjoy working with you, then sometimes your name comes up in their conversations and they say, oh yeah, I love working with Susan. She's great. She's, always there and helpful. And that's kind of like another way to kind of get your name out there is that if you're such a nice, like easy person to work with, then by showing up on time and asking questions and being like interested in what people are saying, then making eye contact, then you're actually like doing network via other people, which then also as an introvert makes your efforts go a lot farther. Yeah, so I'd have to say that one of the big ones that's been super helpful for me is like if you identify a problem, and it could be like a big problem or a small problem, and you bring it to your manager, you should always have a solution ready. And maybe the solution is not going to end up being the right one, or maybe you're not even sure if it's going to be useful, but trying to come up with a solution really is more important than if your solution is actually right. Because then it shows that you're self-starting, but then also you're trying to like support the team and get whatever the job done is. So that's probably my biggest advice.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. I think just being willing to chip in if something's not necessarily your job. I think at least in academia, everything is very fluid and there are a lot of things in flux. So if you're just willing to sort of chip in, if there's a problem or something needs to get done, or one of your colleagues who's working on a similar problem needs some support. So I just want to echo what Lindsay said. I think it's really great if you have the ability just to chip in and you're willing to help, even if it's not inside of your job purview, I guess. And then once again, just stay curious. I think that's one like that Madeleine said too, but just ask questions and stay curious about it. If you don't know something, stay curious. I feel like that's my motto for everything, especially going into grad school when I didn't feel equipped to go to grad school, is just stay curious about the experience, stay curious about what you're learning, stay curious about the environment, all of that.
I agree with what everybody has said. And I have to emphasize soft skills. I have talked to many statistical managers or people who are statistical directors, and they say that what they are looking for, there are plenty of people who you can sit at a computer and do the work, but the person who has the ability to explain what they're doing, why they're doing it, what the benefits of what they're doing are, or the person who has the ability to talk to a variety of professionals and find where the ideas connect. So one of the things I tell people, I'm not the best statistician, because I know a lot of really, really good statisticians, but on the other hand, I'm a generalist. So I have the ability to know a little bit about everything, but then be able to tie it all together so that it will work. And I can see the steps to the final project. So it's the curiosity, it's the willingness to learn, it's the willingness to be stretched, it's the willingness to work with people. Those are all soft skills, which I would say make anyone a much better person to work with, and you will really enjoy your job.
Thank you guys. We're now going to turn to the audience questions, and that will be moderated by Miley and Ellie. And then I'll be typing all the in-person audience questions just in the chat through my laptop. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. Hi, my name's Ellie.
I'm Miley.
And we're the co-vice presidents for Women in Science Club. And we're going to go ahead and ask some of the audience questions. The first question we have is, what is your biggest piece of advice for women in STEM?
Can start by saying that you will probably have to advocate for yourself in a lot of situations. My experience in grad school, even though I had a very supportive advisor, a very supportive group, is sometimes my contributions were overlooked. Right? Like helping someone gather data for a publication means that you should be involved in conversations around authorship or acknowledgement at the very least. You know, and because I was someone who was operating and maintaining instrumentation, I did a lot of assisting. in my graduate work that I was never recognized for. So while I have like my own work and my own publications, my own presentations that I did, I was also doing a lot of other things that I didn't get a lot of recognition for because I didn't know how to advocate for myself and I didn't know to ask if those things were appropriate. So don't be afraid to stand up for yourself in those situations. If you feel like your work isn't being recognized, if you feel like you're being contributing to a larger project, you know, like ask about it. Like, what's the outcome of this? Like, how are we preparing? You know, in a regular job, it'd be like a deliverable, like who else is on the team? Like, if you are supporting and working on something, you should be recognized for that. Even if it's as simple as like your pictures at the end of the presentation, that's still very important.
I would say that I totally agree with that. And if your bosses push back on that, then it's probably not a very good place to work. And so that should be a thing to think about. My biggest advice, and one thing that there was a big lesson that I learned when I worked at FAS is that I had gotten into the habit, it was not a good habit, I had gotten into the habit of sitting through an entire meeting, and usually my boss would be talking or something. And then at the end of the meeting, I would lean over to him and say, why didn't people talk about this idea? Or why didn't they mention this problem? And he was like, Lindsay, you know that you should have said that during the meeting. But as a person who has a ridiculous amount of imposter syndrome, I didn't think that as a newer person, I thought that maybe they weren't mentioning it because they had thought about it already and that it wasn't a good idea. But it actually turns out that you really can't make any assumptions about what people know. Even if they do a very good job of acting very confident, there are inevitably going to be times that they don't know things that they should know and that maybe you had an idea about. And, you know, if you didn't speak up about it, then nobody knows that you know a thing, and that would be valuable for everybody else. So, yeah, my advice would be to never assume that people who are older than you or more experienced than you know everything about the issue that they're working on. And don't be afraid to like ask, why are we doing it this way? Why aren't we doing it this other way? Or related questions, because sometimes you actually do see things that the older person, more experienced person didn't catch.
I will agree about the imposter syndrome. I think that there are many women in STEM who have imposter syndrome, and that means that someone else has to be better than you, or you don't have all these skills when you really do. And it's true that many times when we're in meetings, we say things and we're not heard. So a trick that I have been told is hoping to definitely have at least 2 women in every single meeting. And the women will actually listen to each other. And if I bring up an idea or a thought or a process or a suggestion, the other woman would make sure that she says, that's really interesting. I would like to discuss that. It's almost as though you two are working with each other. And I say that because so many times we as women will make a comment, and then if a male makes exactly the same comment, someone else will chime in, and it's like you weren't heard. And it's really important to be heard and to let your voice out and your suggestions out.
I'm not sure that I have much more to add than the perspectives of the other panelists, but I think I will say sort of a bright spot or a good situation that I ended up in. I was in a rural Washington engineering lab in sort of hardcore hydrology realm, and every single other grad student was a guy, and many of them were international. So it was a very diverse group, but I was the only woman. But something that really stood out to me is that my advisor was the most supportive person I have ever met, and she's pretty much the only reason why I did a PhD, because she was so supportive. And all of the people that she kept around her were these amazingly supportive, kind, extremely intelligent other women who were doing very, very cool science. So I feel like there are major bright spots in this realm too, that although maybe the lab it was only me, but I ended up in a very supportive group of women. Not to say that that's the only type of supportive group at all, but there are also bright spots. So don't feel intimidated. It is still a very male dominated field, but it's changing.
All right, thank you. Our next question, we all know the STEM life is grueling. I know that I've come into lab early, stayed late. Do you guys have any suggestions, or how do you guys balance like work and then social life? Do you guys have any creative outlets or things like that?
I am super outdoorsy. I don't know if this really answers the question, but for me at least, I get all of it's like a work hard, play hard sort of attitude. And that was partially why I did grad school out west, where it would be, I don't know, maybe bad hours during the week and maybe a little bit too much during the week, but would actually try to take off on the weekend. Not always, especially during my master's when you have a shorter period, but really, really make sure to take time off, because there were times where I didn't, and I got very, very close to critical burnout stage. So I think just really prioritizing and having balance, as much as going back to that people can be very competitive. With all the statements of, oh, I was in the lab until 2 p.m. or 2 a.m. last night. I was in the lab at 5 a.m. like this morning. You can do better work when you're refreshed and your brain is clear and you've had a good night's sleep and a few decent solid meals. So I think that would be my piece of advice for when I first started grad school, that you can actually take a break. It's okay. Like, you will do better work because you take a break.
Yeah, I think that's also the same in like a policy field. Obviously, that my job is a lot different, is that I'm not in a lab, and my work pressures are a lot different than it would be if I was like an actual lab scientist. But I think that the pressure to work all the time or work a lot in odd hours is something that in policy you can get a lot, and it's very easy to get sucked into. There's always something going on. There's always some happy hour networking thing that you probably should go to, but you're really tired, or maybe you have to stay up late for a deadline. Or maybe Congress decides to blow up your entire schedule and they pull out some crazy bill or something, and you have to actually like understand what the heck that they're talking about. And so there are times where you're going to have like really ridiculous amounts of work or really funky hours. Like right now, this is my busy season, but I still make a very conscious effort to basically shut off work when I leave the office. Pretty much, I don't really answer any work emails after 5 p.m. unless it's an emergency or there is some sort of pressing work situation, and I don't let the other people in the office push me anymore. It's easier now that I've gotten older, but I say like, nope, I'm going home. I'm gonna do something fun with my dog, and then I'm gonna talk about it tomorrow. The other good thing to think about, and this was something I learned when I worked for the lobbying firm, was I had a coworker who worked for the military in his past life, where he actually was working to retrofit military vehicles for IEDs. And he was like, look, my job actually was life and death at that point. Like, if I screwed up, people did die in the Middle East, and that was really a really terrible thing. But he's like, look, in policy and actually in a lot of jobs, it's not life and death at all, despite the fact that some people will treat it that way. So as long as, like, you think about it in the way like nobody's gonna die if I don't actually get this thing done, it takes also a lot of pressure off. Saying no to a bunch of extra work.
A strong agree with everything Lindsay just said. I think so many people in so many industries, I see this a lot in consulting, treat everything like it's an emergency. And I remind myself constantly, there is no such thing as an agricultural or regulatory consulting emergency. It does not exist. It can wait until tomorrow morning. But I think this is super individualized, like figuring out what your work-life balance is really personal to you and your schedule, how much sleep you like to get, how much you like to eat, when your meal, like all of those things. But I think it's really important that you do something for yourself every single day. If you're the kind of person that wants to sleep in, roll straight to work, that's great. But like, when are you stopping and when are you like making yourself a nice dinner? For me, I'm an early bird, so like my me time happens like first thing in the morning. I want like 2 hours before I even think about work to have the time to myself. And I think that's something I wasn't good at in grad school that led to a lot of burnout and resentment and all that sort of stuff. Because when you give yourself 100% to work, you lose the fun parts of life. And so I like to schedule that stuff in, and I like to do something for myself before I even start work for the day, just to make sure that I fit it in.
There was a time when I didn't emphasize work-life balance. And I can tell you, I physically became very sick on a consistent basis. And so I had to learn that I needed a break. But what I ended up realizing was when I was working and I used to sit at my desk and try to figure out, well, what's the solution? How do I do this? Then what I learned is I would get up from my desk and I would literally, across the street, there was this large pond. And I would literally go across the street and walk that pond. And I would walk the pond to just relax and to relax my mind. And amazingly, I would come up with a solution. It's like if I could get to the point that I could just relax and let myself be, things would work out. And I found out I was much more productive when I got to the point that I gave myself that time to let go, to be outside, and to relax my mind. And I was a much better person when I took care of myself, physically, emotionally, and psychologically.
Thank you so much for your answers. I think that was definitely a great question for students as we try and navigate how to balance school with different social life and hobbies that we have. The next audience question we have is, how can we navigate the changing landscape in science policy and government jobs with the current administration?
This is a hard question, and I don't think that anybody really has a good answer currently. I think that we're kind of in a situation where working directly in the government is probably less likely than it was at even a few years ago. The number of jobs that are open for direct government work are smaller. However, that just sort of means that I recommend trying to think creatively about like what you'd think would be interesting if you really wanted to work in science policy. Then it might make sense, instead of trying to work directly for the government, you either work at a nonprofit or you work at a consulting firm, or instead of the federal government, you could try state government. And there's 50 of those, so there's way more options than relying specifically on the federal government. And then there's always, what's kind of nice is that people come into policy, especially science policy, and go out of the policy landscape like all the time. There are a lot of people I know who used to be Ph.D. scientists who worked in a lab. Now they work in science policy. Sometimes they go into government, they come back out. So going to like a state government job or a nonprofit or something is definitely not closing a door to actually working in the federal government at some point in the future. It's just kind of another slightly less direct way to get there. And honestly, I think sometimes you learn more working outside the government than working inside the government. So I wouldn't recommend thinking in a way where if you can't get a government job, like your experience or path and policy is like never going to happen. Sometimes you just have to think about how close can I get to this type of work that I want to do, but maybe it's not exactly what I want. And maybe it's an association that works on government issues or is in the state government or something related to that. And then you can always go back to the federal government later on.
I'm guessing Lindsay probably has the best insight of this from any of us. But I just want to add a lot of the professional organizations, like I'm a chemist, so I know ACS has a policy division. So that might be a more secure way to kind of think about getting into policy, or if you're interested. But I also even know, I just wanted to call out, I had a professor at Cornell who did the AAAS Science and Technology fellowship like well into his academic career as a professor. And then he started teaching classes on it and created a student group and lots of other things like around science policy that he kind of combined with his academic career. So there are a lot of different ways to do this that you can do outside of an actual government job.
Some of the things that have been previously mentioned, like networking, having a support group is very important, because it's important for you as an individual to understand you're not the only person who's dealing with this situation, whatever situation you're in. Other people are there too. So make sure that you do network, make sure that you do have a support group. I like the fact that associations was brought up. I admit the American Statistical Association has been quite supportive. I have recently become involved in Scholars at Risk, which is for people with PhDs and are researchers. And this organization is more like a resource. How do associations, how do universities deal with political issues that are going on? At one point, they would hardly ever looked at the United States. Now there's a lot of emphasis in the United States of the issues that are going on here. So it's an association that gives you, this organization has been around 25 years and they've looked at situations like this. And so they have a historical perspective. So it's literally understanding that what we're going through has happened before. And different people have been able to make it through, different countries have made it through with difficult times. How did they do it? What can we learn from other people?
Yeah, I think all the panelists gave very good answers for what could be some alternatives. To Lindsay's point, there's a really great science, technology, and policy program just in the state legislature of California. So a lot of these states have a keen interest in the topic of science and technology and policy, especially when you think, my expertise is in agriculture and water, but when you start thinking about states that are heavily dependent on agriculture, there's a big emphasis in the science realm and working with scientists on various levels. So it could be even just taking more of a science role. During my PhD and master's, we worked with a lot of different state agencies and natural resource managers, and helped to write a report for the state of Washington for a forecast about water and agriculture and what that would mean for Washington in a climate altered future. So there are ways to be involved in policy and not necessarily be in the policy space explicitly. The other thing I would say is I ended up unexpectedly taking a year and a half off between undergrad and grad school because I was supposed to do the Peace Corps, and then that did not work out because of some issues in Ethiopia. And I ended up using it to check off bucket list items from my personal aspiration list, where I hiked the Appalachian Trail and went to Vietnam. And that was because I had saved a bunch of money, but you can also use it to do something completely different. I think something I've realized since going through grad school is that time is extraordinarily valuable, and there's always something to fill your time with. But if you have a gap like that, it can be really nice. So maybe your perfect job doesn't exist right now. If you have a couple of months, maybe use it to fulfill some other outlet that you've been waiting to do because you've been too busy. So it could also be, this is a completely different answer, but it could also be just use it for something completely different. Use that time for something completely different.
Okay, we're gonna do one last quick question speed round. Thank you guys for your answers. I know as a senior, this is something that I think about all the time. So it's nice to hear some uplifting thoughts and good advice. Okay, so our final question is just a piece of advice that you would give to us now that you wish you had known when you were in our shoes.
I think I would say that the biggest piece of advice that I wished that I had had when I was still in school was to just be kinder to myself. I think I was really hard on myself to do a very good job, and I would, like, in school, but then also at my internship and my job, and it I was so hard on myself to actually, try to be the best person at doing all these things, that it actually made me develop migraines. So if I like, some days are going to be kind of like bad days, and you'll feel like not super productive, or maybe you made kind of a mistake at work, or you're not feeling so good. That's totally a thing that's going to happen, and it doesn't mean that or maybe you have a series of bad days. I mean, honestly, the last 3 months have probably been the worst professional months I've ever had. And it's been 3 very long months, but and I wouldn't have even imagined that it could take that long to have that's long of a time of it being kind of sucky in my professional life. But now, and I wish I knew it then, taking some time at the end of a day that's kind of crappy and just saying, like, I tried the best that I could today, and maybe the best that I could do today is not as good as it would be tomorrow or like a week ago, but because we are not robots, our best is never going to be the same every day. So just saying, like, I tried as hard as I could today, and that's as much as I could do, and I tried to do a good job. Then as long as you can say, like, I tried to do a good job, and maybe I didn't make it today, I'll just try to do a good job tomorrow, is something that I wish I was more comfortable with when I was younger.
I think for me, I would say just remember that there's no rush. There's no rush to become something at some point. There are no timelines. I think when I was graduating, everybody was talking about all these exciting jobs, and I was like, I don't know what I really want to do yet. Give yourself time to figure it out, and you don't have to hit any benchmarks that others are hitting. You only have to set those for yourself. So I think a piece of advice I would have really enjoyed hearing at that point is that, because I thought that life was going to be over at 30. I had to have all of the fun stuff out of the way by the time I hit 30. And as somebody who recently turned 30, still doing some fun stuff. So there's no rush on it. You can become whatever you want to be at any point in life. As others have mentioned, there's a lot of either personal experience or have seen others changing things later in life. So you don't have to figure out exactly what you want to be for the rest of your life the day that you graduate. So there's no rush.
I'll pass on some advice that someone gave to me when I was in grad school, which is just apply for anything. If you're interested in it, if you think it sounds cool, if you know it's a scholarship that would be nice to have, just apply for it. Like, let somebody else tell you no. Don't let yourself be the reason you don't try for something, because you're not really qualified to assess if you're qualified. Like, let the person who's qualified to do that tell you that you're not good enough. And also don't let that get you down. Like, apply and get used to the rejection, like, because it's gonna happen. That's life. Like, you are not going to get most of the jobs you apply for, but you only need to get one to have a job. So apply for everything, get used to the rejection, let somebody else tell you no, but like continue to believe in yourself.
I fully agree with everybody's advice. Mine would be kind to myself, except understand that I am so much better than I thought I was, and that I have so many more skills than I thought I did, and that I really can achieve an awful lot if I just try to follow my passion, and if I'm willing to take that risk. And that's the hardest thing that I had to learn. I illustrate it in my head by saying, okay, I'm at the edge of the cliff. I can stay where I'm at, but I won't be happy doing that. I can jump off the cliff, and I have no idea where I'm going to land or how I'm going to land, but I'm going to be much happier when I do that. So yes, life is an adventure. Take the time, try everything you can.
Thank you all so, so much. With that, I'm going to end us off. I would really love to just thank the panelists so much, so much, and our alumni for sharing all of this advice. And I feel like I learned a lot, especially as a graduating senior who doesn't exactly know where my life is going to take me at. But yeah, thank you all so, so much. I'd like to thank the Career Center and also Dr. Larkin for helping us put this whole thing together. We could not have done it without the help of both of you. And I'd also like to thank my e-board members, both my moderators today, and then the ones who unfortunately couldn't show up. We've been working really hard to put this together as we hold this every year, and it's always a really fun event. So yeah, with that, I will end us off. Thank you once again.
Thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed this. The panelists are just amazing.
You were fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'd also say I'm also happy to talk with people in depth more if they'd like.